For today's video, we'll speak about the Gold Coast Suns. So you might be thinking, with Gold Coast, are we just going to talk about Tuke Miller and Matt Rao for 10-15 minutes? There's a few picks at Gold Coast who have gone up in my calculations, so these players I'm excited to talk about, share my research about them, and definitely one where you don't want to ignore other players. So how will Gold Coast go in 2022? I think, look, they've made mistakes with development, recruiting, lots of other mistakes I can't think of right now, but we have to remember they drafted their core for the next premiership, or the next tilt at a premiership, if that ever comes. But 2018, 2019, Rao Anderson, Lukosius King, all those players, these guys need to get to mid-20s, so at least early mid-20s, 23, 24. So give them a bit of time, and it does feel like a very long rebuild, but it's just a second rebuild really. So bottom 6 for Gold Coast, I think. And yeah, we'll start speaking about the players. So defense, I have Jack Bowes, 450k. The first 2 notes on Jack Bowes, I traded him in 2021. It was a disaster. It was good for about 5-6 rounds, and then not so much. Hamstring issues in 2019 and 2021. That has ruled him out for me. I don't want none of that. So yeah, the only hamstring durability history with soft tissue history I think I have is Darcy at the moment. I think McRae did one like 5-6 years ago, but other than that, yeah, it's just not one where, look, he's very talented. He was a star mid, was a top 10 pick back in his draft a few years ago, 5-6 years ago now. So he has a lot of great attributes. High tackler, high contested possession count, which is usually a good indicator if they make it as a midfielder at AFL level. Does lack a little bit of athleticism and explosiveness. So look, he's training in the midfield group. I expect him to get early opportunity. I don't know how he scores there. I don't know if his durability, his body can hold up for it. So for me, I should have just stopped at hamstring really. It's a no from me, but I'd like to see what he can do in the midfield nonetheless. And then Lukosius, training with the forward group. Don't need to say any more on that. Needs to play that intercepting role where he can go 90 plus, otherwise waste of time. So we'll move on to the midfield. Now the big dog, 680k, Tuke Miller. So we know how, there's not really much to speak on Tuke's game, because we saw him in 2021, inside, outside ball, ferocious tackler. I think 6 to 7 tackles a game, just below steal. Enormous work rate. His point of difference, I think, is when he gets the ball, he kind of sprints for it rather than just jogging or moving a bit faster than usual. But he actually full on sprints for the ball, and I don't know how taggers can keep up with him. So another thing is Josh Dunkley was interviewed on ESPN. They asked him who is the hardest midfield matchup, and this was early 2021. And of all the midfielders he could have picked, he picked Tuke Miller over Oliver, Bont, etc. So yeah, it sounds like he's a nightmare matchup for players. Just works too hard. I think he was close to 130 post-buy. I fully expect him to go 130. You might say, oh, well, he only has one history of 120 plus, whereas, Steele, McRae and such, Oliver have multiple years. Why would I pick Tuke? Well, it's just who you prefer to this lot. You look at Steele. People doubted Steele because he only did it for 1 year last year. I was more than comfortable starting him because you can see what he's like off the field. Super hard worker. Takes the responsibility. Like, think about what Tuke's done here. The Gold Coast has been such a rebel, and he said, I'm going to be the one to take this club. I'm signing my life away, my football career away at Gold Coast to lead this club to wherever it goes. So there's not, how many players do you see get the hell out of Gold Coast? So it's enormous respect for his character and work ethic. I have no doubt in my mind he's 125 plus minimum this year. So if you want to pick him, go for it. If you don't, we got plenty of nice alternatives, no worries. But he's one where I wouldn't be surprised if he opens the season with 140s. He's just that good. So, but yeah, probably too hard to sustain that sort of level. But nonetheless, I feel very comfortable picking Tuke Miller. And he's one where if I can fit him in, I will. If I can't, well, great. I've got McRae and Oliver and whoever else. So, perfectly fine pick. The next one is Braden Fiorini, 550k. Plays inside and outside. Time and ground's generally not the best. It's just not an option for me. It's simple as that. Job security wasn't perfect last year, although I think he'll keep playing. So not really much to speak on. One, if he was a lot cheaper, we could speak about him, but not at 550. Just better alternatives. Neil at the same price. The next one is Noah Anderson. So his trajectory is good coming into third year. Generally, we see breakouts. They can happen earlier, but generally they happen fourth, maybe not fourth, fifth and sixth years when they come into it. Saw that with Parrish this year. Steele, Tukes, that's that sort of range. So, it can happen earlier, but last year he didn't kick a single goal. He was a goal-kicking midfielder in his junior days. And his tackle count was quite low, 3 tackles a game. It's not good enough, unfortunately. So I fully expect him to improve, but I have no evidence of what he can do at AFL level just yet. So it's basically a bet that he improves. So I don't really see the point, but I think he'll get there one day. I move on to the Rucks. Jared Witt's 380k. I think this pick is bait. I'm seeing this pick in AFL fantasy a lot. He's coming off an ACL. Did his ACL in round 3. So he's going to be very much touch and go for round 1. So we'll miss a fair chunk of preseason, I assume, or won't be able to do everything. So he's a really strong ruckman. He's always been suited to other formats because he gets a ton of hit outs, but his hit out to advantage rate, maybe the midfield below him has something to do with that. But it must not be the best because he's piling on all these hit outs, but he's not even averaging 100 plus. So look, he's a really good ruckman, probably in the top third ruckmans in the league, but coming off for the ACL, it's a very awkward price. Where do you go if something goes wrong with him? Do you really want to bet on Bruce or someone else? I don't think so. So it's a pass for me. Just pay an extra 250k for Gawn, Grundy or Darcy, whichever one you fancy. So yeah, it's an interesting pick. But yeah, he's been very consistent. 2019, 3 scores below 90, so that's pretty good. Or that's AFL fantasy rather. So look, Witts is a pass. I'll see how he progresses because he's coming off the ACL. Players generally aren't at their best post an ACL that year. So with the exception of Lenny Hayes, I think that's the only player. So yeah, we did see Doherty break down a few years ago towards the back half of the season off his ACL, but yeah, very tough and unfortunate. We'll move on to the forward line. There's only one player here I have, and that's Lockie Weller, 400k. Not sure where his role is. It sounds like it's forward, and has hamstring injury history. So I think we'll move on from that. But was sort of highly touted for a while there. They gave up pick 2 for him. Wasn't named in... There was a bunch of names mentioned at training. I think it was Rao, Fiorini, Alex Davies, who we'll speak about soon, Tuke Miller, Bose, and someone else, I think. And this was the 6 players that were playing midfield against each other. No mention of Weller. Anderson was the other one. No mention of Weller. So, bad luck. So, it doesn't seem like there's a spot there in the midfield. Not really sure where he's at. Plus, injury prone. I think we'll stop wasting our time now. And we'll move on to the mid-prices. Actually, I should have said Witts was a mid-pricer, but chucked him in the ruck section. So the mid-pricer that's interesting is Matthew Rao, 350k. All we've heard from Matt Rao, preseason just started, but before Christmas, they were saying he was dominating clearances at training. And that's pretty much all we know. So positive signs, which is good. His tackle numbers were okay last year in 2021 rather. But he had 0 scores above 85, and clearly injuries have hampered him because he's not the same dude we saw in the first 5 or 6 games, or first 4.5 games, or whatever it was in 2020. So with Rao, it's a hard one because the talent is there. He was ready made, but it just didn't eventuate for him with all the injuries. He dropped that 140, 170. He was kicking 2 goals a game. All these massive scores were in wins in 2020, so it's sort of small sample size, and don't expect Gold Coast to win too much. I'm not sure the sample size is strong enough to develop some sort of correlation there, but nonetheless thought it was worth mentioning. I'm not interested in Rao. I think at 350k you need to average minimum 100, probably 105 to break even with to make like 150k or so. So I don't really think he can do it. To be honest, he was quite awful in 2021. Just watching him, he was very stationary at stoppages. That's what I noticed. He used to attack the ball, used to hold on to it for too long as well, but sometimes it worked out for him. So, yes, just ball watching wasn't getting to the right spots. and 350k. Is he going to repeat that unbelievable form in 2020? It's a guess. I'm not sure. If he looks, say he gets 30 touches in the practice game, I probably still won't, because I think the bar is so high. And I mentioned this in the podcast with Dr. Supercoach. At his price, the bar is very high for him to work out as a pick. He's not going to be a keeper. There's too many 120 plus guys now. And the midfield spots are so precious. We can pay down for Horn Francis, Dacos, all these other guys as well. Maybe Barry, maybe Finn McRae. See how they go. So mid spots are too precious. And if he averages 100, 105, then you're only really breaking even at the price. But it is still nice to have a player that scores that well. Potential M8 keeper if things go wrong. I just too unsure. It's not. Yeah, it's more that the price is probably the main issue here, and he's not a keeper. So, look, I think we'll move on from Rao. But yes, the eye test. If you want to pick Rao, he must pass the eye test in the preseason. So there he goes. The next one I have is Chol. The only reason why I've got him here is if Witz doesn't play, he might play solo ruck. He has 3 scores of 90 plus as a main ruck, and then he scored poorly in the other 2 games where he played as a main ruck. They were against Nick Nat and Grundy. So I don't really see any point in this, to be honest, but could score okay if Witz is out for quite a long time, but yeah, very unlikely anyway. The next one I have is Flanders 260k. Now you might know Sam Flanders was a midfield forward as a junior, but probably one of those, you expect him to move into full-time midfield eventually, but he was one of the names, as I mentioned before, that wasn't named to be in the midfield group, that was training in the midfield group. So that says to me that he's going to play forward again. Gold Coast have signed him till 2023, and in that article they were saying they were really impressed with the forward pressure he brings. That says to me that he's probably going to spend a bit more time forward before he can transition into the midfield. So hasn't looked super great, but hasn't had a great role either for Supercoach scoring anyway. So an interesting one that has the scope to play midfield, but it doesn't seem like there's a spot for him or that he might be ready for that just yet. In his draft profile, consistency was an issue for him. That is a big red flag, I think, because you can develop inconsistency, whether that's endurance or whatnot. Footy IQ, I'm not sure, but it seems to still be an issue now. So until we see that phased out, then he's put a line through him for me. And now we'll move on to the rookies. And there's a ton of rookies here, and there's a few that need to be spoken about. So first one is Elijah Hollands, mid-forward. If he's named round 1, which I think he will be, I think you just lock him in. I've spoken about him a fair bit. Loved him as a player. Prototype Bontempelli. Seems like a great character. Infectious personality if you listen to him talk. So very impressed with Elijah Hollands. In his last game in the VFL, he had 27 touches. Coming off ACL, so that is pretty impressive. I think he ended up playing around 4 games, but he was managed, so he only was getting like 50s or something like that, managed throughout those games. So, I think the talent is huge. He could have been pick 1 in his draft year, and a year in the system to train, albeit limited. We'll get a full run at it this preseason. The only knock I have is does probably need to put on a little bit of meat on the bones, but I haven't seen him post Christmas. So other than that, he's a star. Love him as a player. Very excited to watch him develop. I'm not sure he's fieldable option just yet because he might be stuck at half forward, but we'll see. But nonetheless, if he pushes up the ground, which I expect he will, I think he will be a reasonable option for us. Maybe average in the 60s or something like that, with scope for a bit more depending on how he's developed. So put him in your team for now. I expect him. I'd be surprised if he didn't play round 1, but they've got a lot of young kids at Gold Coast that they want to play. So just if he's ready or not, I think he'll play though. Now the next one, this to me is the most interesting one of the lot. It's Charlie Constable. So from my research from Constable, he's training at halfback and in the midfield, and I'm thinking, well, their midfield. I've named all these players. This video, how their midfield looks pretty full at the moment, but he's training at halfback as well. Bose has moved into the midfield, and reading, I think it was Nightmare's draft profile, he had him in the top 15, top 20 of his draft, and said, I think it was high accumulating midfielder with scope to play halfback. which was interesting. This might have been 2017, something like that. Might be 2018, one of those years. Can't remember exactly. Which is interesting because now he's training at halfback, and back then, Nightmare knew that he had scope to play halfback. So maybe there's something there, and he'll play at halfback because we know he can accumulate. Time on ground and endurance isn't definitely a big issue, so those numbers we'll need to see in the preseason. But for 200k, playing halfback, if he can look really, really good in that role, I might be tempted to pick Constable. So, yeah, I'm just trying to add things up. His tackle count is pretty low, which probably one of the reasons why he wasn't getting games. I think 3 a game in the VFL is probably not good enough for a midfielder. So maybe he can find a spot down at halfback. If he can, great. Very keen to watch him play at halfback. So I'm expecting him to be there, and we'll just see how he goes. So 200k been in the system 4 or 5 years now. See how he goes. The next one is Alex Davies. So he was one of the players training in the midfield group. So second year player now, 68 VFL average, 200k. I think there's too much competition at the 200k range, but because he looks like he might have the role there, not sure on how much time he gets in the midfield because there are players ahead of him, but we'll see how he goes. We are one to watch nonetheless. Jez McLennan, 4th year out of contract. One of the players that was delisted with Greenwood, so they probably weren't afraid to lose him. Rebounding defender, 60 average in the VFL, less than 1 tackle a game. Very disappointing reading those stats, so I don't know where he's at, if he's any good or not, but he's out of contract and hasn't probably developed, hasn't got a game in 3 years. So see how he goes in the preseason, I guess, but not looking too hot. Rory Thompson will be 31, very low scoring power. Expect him to play lockdown key defender. Doesn't really accumulate. Partially tore his ACL late 2020, so that would explain why he didn't play in 2021. Not sure where he's at. Not really sure. So I don't think he's worth picking. He might make 100k or something, but don't know about his job security. Don't know where he's at with his ACL. So let that one go, I think. The next one is Bodie or UW Land. We'll say UW Land. Erland, I don't know. 1 and 2k defender mid. So this guy was taken as a rookie when he shouldn't have been. It was just something that slipped under the radar because of Gold Coast concessions. They had the opportunity to take him as a rookie when he was actually in Nightmare had him in the top 20 of his Phantom Draft. Not Phantom Draft, power rankings. So intercepting defender with midfield scope, powerful player, fierce competitor. 52 average in the VFL, was able to play VFL because he was part of the academy. So that is okay. So interesting one. Not sure. See how he's developed. Still very young. Maybe with Lucocious going forward, there might be a spot down back. Maybe someone else takes that spot. So high talent, fierce competitor. We love that. It means he brings the heat every game. So keep an eye on him. Not sure. Doesn't seem to have super high scoring power, unfortunately, but 102k. Defender mid if you can get a game and look good in the preseason, maybe, but yeah, we'll just have to see. Here's another hard one. Huego Paul Away, that's his name. Mid forward, 123k. His nickname is Ace, so we'll call him Ace. I think that's much easier to say. So early in 2021, he was training very well, trained as a pressure forward, good kick inside 50. That's all I could find on him. Not a whole lot, but seems promising. Or just had an article on him which sounded promising, so I had a few good things to say about that. I think up forward they got developing Roses up forward. Sexton is still there, so I'm not really sure how he fits in, but seems like a good talent and one they might want to get in when they can. So keep an eye on him. And then Malcolm Roses, 30 average in the AFL, 66 average in the VFL. He's 3rd year now. Doesn't accumulate much, but can find the goals at VFL level. So another year of development. I watched him in 2021 because he was a rookie for us. He's 130k now, so he struggled to find the pill. I thought just didn't get involved. Would go have patches where a whole quarter where I didn't see him. So see how he has developed over the preseason, but doesn't seem too promising big roses. Then I have 3 rucks here: Moyle, Patrick Murdiger, and Controy. These are all 123k rucks. Moyle is probably the one. He played for Collingwood's VFL team, and then the Gold Coast picked him up in the mid-season draft. Chance that he could have played, but I think he's probably in front as the backup. And the other 2, not too sure, to be honest. Couldn't find almost any info on those 2. So, although Murdiger is a ruck forward, and he was a Queensland Decathlon champion, so I guess there's a lot of rookies here. It's just because maybe there's a support role with Witts. If Witts is out, say they play Chol, and then maybe they play some of these other rookies. I'm not too sure, so see how that goes. But yeah, that's the Gold Coast Suns. So the main 3 I'd like to see. Took has nothing to prove. Just out of curiosity, see how Bose goes in the midfield. See if Witts is fit. Constable, see if he gets the roll down back, and then Matt Rao, see if he passes the eye test. Now that went way too long, went over too many plays, but yeah, thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you guys soon.